So a lot of people have exercise tubing and utilize exercise tubing or resist-a-bands, the double-handled tubing, and they often think that any movement or any exercise is beneficial. And while that might have some general truth, it's not specific enough. And when we're not specific enough, we can run into some issues, especially when each individual's body requires more specificity and some variations to that individual. And so one thing I want to demonstrate is a lot of times people will grab the tubing and start to do shoulder exercises. So if I stand on the same leg that I'm lifting up on, and if I'm doing a lateral raise, then when I start lifting, I don't get blocked to about right here. So there's no resistance besides the weight of my arm until I get right here. And then when I go up, it's almost directly down. Well, if I make a change and I stand with the tubing on my inside foot or the opposite foot, now there's resistance much earlier. So now I'm getting hit with resistance here. And then as I lift up, it's not nearly as down, right? Because before it was going from this foot, so it was a much more vertical. Now it's more horizontal. However, that's still not as good as it could be, right? Because this tubing increases its resistance as I lift up, and I don't necessarily want a force that's pulling me directly down. And so one thing that I can do is attach the tubing to an anchor point that now I can stand further away from, and now the resistance actually happens right here, where before it wasn't even occurring to right there, right? And a lot of that has to do with how far away I stand. So I can now choose to stand further away from this anchor point. Tying it onto something allows me to stand further away because I'm not having to use my feet, my own body. And now I have the resistance here, and now I get a nice pull. And even as I get up here to where I have the weight of my arm that I'm holding up, now the resistance is a much more horizontal resistance. So I have the weight of my arm pulling me down, the tubing pulling me back. Here I get my deltoid to be able to do this initial lift along with my supraspinatus muscle, so my big lateral horizontal abductors of the shoulder and humerus. So again, I've got good range of motion, got good force, and I'm pulling out. One of the best exercises that I'd recommend you doing for your shoulders is a lateral raise with tubing. One of the best ways of doing this exercise is attaching it to an anchor point further away from your body. So that gives you some flexibility of where do you want this resistance to start. If I start closer, the resistance doesn't start till my arm is away from my body. But if I want to give my shoulders a really good challenge that most people do not do, it's standing further away. So my arm actually gets challenged right here. And now as I lift up, this is a much more appropriate exercise that matches the resistance, matches the mechanics of your force or the strength profile of your muscles in the joints of your shoulder, right? So this resistance profile is more aligned with the actual strength profile of these areas of your shoulder and muscles and joints in your shoulder. So we want you to be able to emphasize that. Another great exercise to do with the exercise tubing is anchoring away and doing a frontal raise, right? So if I have it at my body, it's only going to go straight down, where if I'm able to anchor away, now I can start the resistance anywhere that I want, right? So I can start it right here, as opposed to here, the resistance doesn't start to there. So it's just stepping a little bit further away. I can even get resistance with my arm behind me, and then I still have resistance, and as I lift up, I still have now the weight of my arm, and the tubing is more pulling me back rather than just straight down, right? So this is, again, a better exercise, especially for anyone that has any shoulder issues. We want you to use your exercise tubing to help you start getting your shoulders stronger, but being a little bit more strategic and specific is going to give you a greater return for the amount of effort you're putting forth.